You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Welcome to The Social Workers. You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB, University at Albany, 90.9 FM. This morning we have a guest who's going to be calling in later in the show, but right now, Alyssa, I always call, you know why I call you Alicia?
Why?
Because I used to work with somebody who was Alicia, and I realized the last show, I think it was this show, Alyssa and I do this show every week, Thursday, with our board op, Luke Stein. Hi, Luke. And
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. And when I think I said goodbye last week, I said Alicia, and it's Alyssa. And that's why, because I for quite a while, a few years, I worked with somebody who was Alicia. So
there's a lot of different variations of the name, so I get used to it.
Well, Alicia, Alyssa, Catherine, Alyssa and I are both MSWs, and we co-host the show. And in case this is the first time you're tuning in, we have a guest this morning who's going to be talking about emotional eating. Alyssa, what's the title of her book? It's Dr. Susan Albers.
Eat.Q, Unlock the Weight Loss Power of Emotional Intelligence. So it's really an exciting topic. The book got great reviews, and it's such a with our culture today, if so much of it is centered around food, it's no wonder that people get caught up into the emotional eating side. We eat when we're happy, we eat when we're sad. It's always every type of celebration, party. There's always it's always centered around food. And as a new mom, I'm trying to introduce foods to my daughter right now. We're at that phase of testing out new foods and seeing what she likes and eating when, getting her to want to eat. And it's something I'm very interested in talking to this guest about, how children develop their eating styles.
Dr. Albers, Eat.Q is the title of the book, right? This is one of she's many books. She's written several books on eating. It's mindful eating, which is what we're talking about. Mindful eating is also a topic. If you go to NASW, the NASW website, helpstartshere.org. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, okay. So if you go to helpstartshere.org, NASW, there's a whole, what would you call it? It's a blog, well, I guess it was a blog on surviving diets and preventing eating disorders, and it's all part of what you're saying. You're talking about your daughter. Maybe we have opportunities to prevent some of these eating disorders as parents and as social workers if we participate in mindful eating, which is something that you obviously are trying to do, nursing your baby. I did the same thing. I nursed 3 babies. Alyssa and I have in common, we're big nursers.
Well, it's just such importance. I'm very passionate about it because it just offers so much nutrition for your child. So
it's a good thing. But people, I think one of the things is in our society, well, let's talk about this, because the social workers website refers to it as attuned eating, which is a little bit different than Dr. Albers, or maybe it's the same thing. But I think maybe attuned eating and mindful eating are the same thing. Be aware of what you're eating. Mm-hmm. And in our culture, we don't seem to be aware of what we're eating. And people have all kinds of excuses. You and I were talking about this before the show. We're stressed out. We have too much stress in our lives. Order a pizza, or, do what's quick, get chicken wings, whatever we get, rather than be mindful of what we're eating and taking time to eat the right things and not eat too much and just be aware, and maybe taking a little bit more time with our bodies in terms of what we put into our bodies.
It's all about convenience, and I think some people say, "Oh, I don't have the time. I'm working late, or I'm doing something else, or I'm a new mom. I don't have the time to eat healthy." And there's always the time. You have to make the time for certain things that are a priority, and your health and what you're eating is a priority. It's what keeps you going every day. It's what fuels you. And I think sometimes our mindset is, "Oh, why bother making something from scratch or fresh if I can just go to the store and get it already pre-made, or if I can just order and it can be delivered to my house. I don't have to cook for the family of 5." So it's definitely, we have to get away from the convenience and to get sort of back to having food be something that is really what it is, nourishing us and let's be part of making it and been preparing it for us and our families.
It's included in a healthy lifestyle, and back again to the NASW website, because they approach eating as it's the non-diet approach. It's not this all or nothing thing. I eat too much, I eat the wrong foods, and then suddenly I'm on a diet and eating just the opposite. And so there's good food and bad food. It's incorporating a healthy lifestyle of eating, and it's not this all or nothing kind of thing, which is, I think, is really important, which is what you're talking about. Make peace with food.
Yeah, food isn't the enemy, and I think in so much stuff today, I mean, diet industries are making billions of dollars off all these, diet products and pills and all of this other stuff, really, that isn't really healthy for us. But we need to get back to food is, our friend. It's what nourishes us. We need it. How can we make it something that is a part of our life in a healthy way?
Well, Dr. Albers talks about emotional hunger, and so does NASW, helpstartshere.org, that website. Emotional hunger, when we have stress in our life, when we are upset about something, when we can't manage those feelings, or we think or we feel we can't manage those feelings, then we run to the refrigerator or we order a pizza. I keep getting back to ordering the pizza to kind of to nurture us. And this is not a good way to be eating. We should eat because we are physically hungry, and be aware of that, not to nurture ourselves because we can't deal with whatever feelings are associated with the stresses in our lives, right?
And it starts when we're kids. I remember I was watching, I think it was the Oprah show, and a girl was on, and I think something had happened to her, some sort of trauma in her childhood, and the way that her relatives were helping her deal with it was they'd always give her ice cream or something to make her feel better. And she ended up having that relationship with food because, okay, this made me feel better at the time, and she kept turning to that as she got older and older. So much of our society today always turns to food to make people feel better when they're sad or when they're happy. Let's give food, and I think kids start to process, this is making me feel better, this is what I need, and it goes on to adulthood where it gets out of control.
Well, don't you see kids? I mean, you're a young mother, so you associate sometimes, I assume, with other young mothers, and if the kid is crying or if they're in a situation that whatever it is that's uncomfortable, give them some food. Even if it's healthy food, that's not a good thing to do. Even if it's because what it associates food with that emotional eating rather than food when you're hungry. It's food to satisfy the crying or the running around or, behavior that the mother doesn't, it's not a good situation. So in a way, even healthy food is not good in that kind of a situation.
That's something I've been, that's something I've been more aware of, and I've been trying not to do. So when she is crying, sometimes it's so easy, give her some milk and she'll stop. And I start to realize, okay, when did she last eat? I know she's not hungry. She's crying for a different reason. Sometimes she just has to cry it out. It's not something that, it might be she didn't get her own way or she wants something that she can't have. And I think parents have to be more mindful of what their child's needs really are. So it isn't always crying for hunger. And I think sometimes when we see a child cry, it's, check the diaper and feed them, give them milk. That's not always what it is. And I think as parents, we have to start being more mindful as to the other things that might be causing our child to cry, and not always centering it on food and having a food to sort of make the situation better.
Well, I watch television, and I watch these ads, and I watch the ads that they are promoting for kids in terms of eating, the stuff, the junk, and it's still out there. Maybe it's not out there quite as much. I'm not sure. I mean, they talk about McDonald's, for instance. They've changed their tune. Do you know what I think it's?
Now they're giving books too.
But they're instead of getting a Happy Meal, or instead of saying, when you go through the thing, I haven't been to McDonald's in probably 15 years. But when you go through the thing, they don't say, do you want more French fries? They say, do you want salad and fruit? Is that what they, Luke, you look like you're ready to say something. Say it.
All right. So my mom only eats Happy Meals from McDonald's. Like, that's her, junk food for, traveling, is she will get a 4-piece chicken McNugget Happy Meal. And what they have started to do in response to the healthier, promoting healthier options with the Happy Meals, at least, is they used to give you, for a while, they were we're going to give the kids the option of either getting French fries or apple slices. And then no one was ordering the apple slices. So what they do now is they give you a really small thing, like an even smaller thing of French fries, and then also apple slices. So you're forced to like get both. And then hopefully the theory is that you'll eat both.
They're detoxifying you, kind of, right? It's like a detox program that you don't even realize. So what do you mean? So you automatically start eating those little apple slices because they're there?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's like you don't have, like, maybe you're still like, maybe you won't eat them, but like, at least you're not eating as many French fries, and hopefully you will eat the apple slices. And my mom always does now. She's very happy with that because when she would get the Happy Meal, she would always immediately go to the trash can and throw out half the French fries. Because she knew that for herself, if the French fries were there, she would just eat all of them. And that those are a lot of calories, so what she would do is just throw out half of them. And now that they don't even do that, it's much easier, and she can just eat all the French fries that are there and then eat the apple slices and be happy with it.
Dr. I was going to say, Dr. Albers, our physician who's going to be on the show today, our psychologist who's going to be on the show today, she did an experiment similar to what your mother's been doing at McDonald's. Mm-hmm. She took a group of her friends to France, I guess, and some of them were physicians, healthcare people who are in the healthcare profession, and rented a house or a villa or whatever. And she did an experiment with them. She took M&Ms. Mm-hmm. Most people like M&Ms. Do they not? I like M&Ms. I haven't had those since 1999 either. But
wow.
And her theory is that if it's there, you're going to eat it, which is kind of what you're talking about. So she took a huge bag of M&Ms. This is a house that they're all sharing, and put one bag on the kitchen table that was open to everybody, and then she took the other bag of M&Ms and put them kind of in an obscure place in the house. They were there, they were available, but you really didn't see them all the time. You weren't passing by.
Right.
And I'm not being exact about this, but within a certain period of time, the M&Ms that were on the kitchen table were gone completely. It took a few hours a day, whatever. The other ones, no one was eating because they were out. They weren't in a drawer, but they weren't available. So it kind of proves that point.
And I've seen a similar experiment where somebody had it in a closed container and versus the glass container that you can see in, and the stuff that's in the glass container that you always see and you can see the candy staring at you, that usually goes quicker as well than if it's in a container that's, a dark color. You have to actually open a lid to get into it. When you don't see it, it's usually... You can usually avoid it a lot better.
I have some advice with my kids. That's what I did. I used to take carrots and tomatoes and apples and all that stuff, and that was available. That was out. That was the easy thing that they could, when they're racing through the house, they could grab. Not to say that the other foods were taboo. I didn't buy them because they're going to eat them at somebody else's house. Because if you make it taboo, then they're definitely going to go out and scrounge for M&Ms and chocolates and fried foods. But what you have control over what you have in your own house and what you make readily available, and that's what they end up wanting, because that's what they're used to. I mean, not to say we didn't have potato chips and stuff, but it was limited. It really was limited. And I never bought soft drinks, and I know they drank those outside but still, that's not drinking on a daily basis in our house. So, milk, fruit juice, that kind of stuff. So I never bought the soft drinks. And
I think it's just having your kids grow up in a healthy having that healthy mindset, that healthy lifestyle. I mean, what McDonald's is doing is great with the healthy meal, the Happy Meals, but it's still, parents are still taking their kids to McDonald's, which is sort of on a regular basis sometimes, and it's sort of, you have to still bring it back to home. It has to be more prepared foods. McDonald's used to be a reward for me. It's something like, it was not often. It was something that, okay, if it's a reward, we'll go out for McDonald's because it's a treat. Whereas it's not something I'm going to. I mean, some of the kids I know were going there several times a week, and it was just sort of, let's go here because it's more convenient. And I still think we have to have that mindset of what's healthy and what's not. Even though there's some apple slices in McDonald's, that's still not the healthiest choice you could be making versus a home-prepared meal with good nutrition.
Maybe there has to be a little bit of guilt or shame associated with eating French fries, like just that kind of, you talk about emotional eating, like when you pick up, you think about, well, this has to do with mindful eating. You pick up that French fry and you feel a little bit guilty about eating it. You think about it. What's this going to do to me? Not just getting a whole...
Well, I think they're trying to do that with all the calorie postings.
Yes.
And I think they're trying
Do you think is it working? We have in New York State, what's the law? You have to
post the calories or have them available to somebody for the people to see.
In New York State as a whole, it has to be available everywhere. And in Albany, it has to be posted on the menu.
I mean, I think it's a good thing in a way, but sometimes it's like when you're going out for like a treat, sometimes it's like, do we really need to know all the calories? I mean, I think people know what's healthy and what's not, and I think it has to be more of a personal choice. It has to be personal responsibility for some point. I mean, the organization has a responsibility, but people have to have responsibility of what they're consuming, and that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're going to take a break because our guest is here, and we'll listen to a couple PSAs, right, Luke? And then we're coming back with Dr. Albers, Dr. Susan Albers, and we're going to be talking about her new book, Eat.Q. Unlock the Weight Loss Power of Emotional Intelligence.
On the next episode of Recipes for Disaster.
So we've got our neighbor Paul coming over tonight for a barbecue, which is why I prepared a delicious lemon rosemary steak marinade from my special collection of old family recipes. To make sure the steaks are extra tender, I left them marinating out on the counter overnight, just like Nana used to.
Maria may mean well, but without food safety, it never ends well. Always thaw or marinate foods in the refrigerator at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or below, or you could make your friends and family really sick. Maria's neighbor Paul didn't think twice about the steak he ate until he was presenting his company's financial forecast to the board. That's when a sudden bout of food poisoning made it explicitly clear that profits weren't the only thing on the rise. Watch Recipes for Disaster at foodsafety.gov. You'll learn the right steps as Maria does everything wrong. Brought to you by the USDA, HHS, and the Ad Council.
You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
We're back. You're listening to The Social Workers. I'm your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to the Social Workers Radio Talk Show here at the University at Albany, 90.9 on your dial with Catherine and Alyssa, MSWs. And joining us this morning is Dr. Susan Albers. She's a psychologist. Her new book is Eat.Q. Unlock the Weight Loss Power of Emotional Intelligence. Dr. Albers is a clinical psychologist at the Cleveland Clinic Family Health Center, specializing in eating issues, weight loss, body image concerns, and mindfulness. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on, Dr. Albers.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on this morning.
Yes, and I think you're back. You were on my other show, I think, a couple of years ago, but with one of your other books. And you've written several, obviously. But today we're going to be talking about Eat.Q. We've already been talking about you and your book before you got on the show, I want you to know. So Eat.Q, we're talking about mindfulness, right? Mindful eating. And
right.
Yeah. So Eat.Q, what is different, I guess, about this book, say, than your other books? Because they also had to do with mindful eating.
So true, yes. If you listen to the title Eat.Q, it probably reminds you of IQ. And it's a little bit of a play on those words, because every day I have people who come into my office who say, you know what, I know a lot about nutrition. I've read a lot of books. I've studied a lot of diets, but what I don't know is how to choose the foods that I want to eat and how to stay motivated. So this book, how it's different is that it does focus around mindful eating, but it adds in the component of emotional intelligence, which includes things like resilience, which is something that we need when we get off track with our eating to get back on board, motivation, and talking ourselves through that little voice on your shoulder that says, oh, I think I'll just start tomorrow. So it adds all those different components, and there's lots of new stories that I tell about clients, readers who have contacted me. So lots of new information.
All right, new information. You started out, you said resilience. That has to do with intelligent eating. And both Alyssa and I think that we are intelligent eaters. We're thin. We're mindful. I think I do a lot of what you're talking about. But specifically, what does resilience mean in terms of being like an intelligent eater?
We all need a little bit of resilience when we eat, because we all have those days when we're we're having a great day, and then we have some sort of pleasure food that we love. We open up a bag of chips, and we just go a little overboard, mindlessly eat. And it can derail your whole path. Maybe your goal is to eat healthy or lose weight, and that happens, and you just get off track. I can't tell you how many clients I have who say, I just got off track, and I could not get back on board. That just derailed me. So resilience is about dealing with when you get off track, but it's also about coping with stress. And we all have so much stress in our lives. I have a whole chapter devoted to stress eating because I think it's such a huge topic for a lot of people. And being able to cope with stress and deal with stress, sometimes for a lot of my clients that I work with, that's the first thing that we have to address before we even talk about food.
Coping with stress. Well, before the show, Alyssa and I, too, were talking about you and your book. And stress, I think we have the same amount of stress. Maybe it's a different kind of stress than we've always had stress. Human beings just being here on this earth, we have stress, right? We had stress in the 50s and the 60s. We had stress in the last century. But why today, when we experience stress, do we turn to food? I don't think that other generations necessarily did that, or we wouldn't have this obesity problem or this overweight problem that we have. 50% of us are overweight, and 20% are obese. The statistics keep climbing, I think. But so why is that?
Well, I think there's lots of reasons. One reason is that we don't teach kids early on about how to deal with stress. A lot of parents unintentionally use food as a way to soothe and calm their kids. They fall down, they give them a cookie. I recently was at a friend's house, and I was watching her daughter who was working on a puzzle, and her little brother came over and destroyed the puzzle. And, of course, she was all upset. And all of a sudden, she got into this yoga pose, like this lotus yoga pose, and started doing some deep breathing. And I was so floored. And I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, my teacher taught me that when I'm stressed, I should do some yoga poses." And here she was learning how to calm and soothe herself. And I thought, wow, this is really kind of a revolutionary approach to teach kids early on how to deal with stress. And if we could teach kids early on how to deal with stress, that maybe later in their lives they wouldn't turn to food so often. Because even in the ads that we look at on TV and in newspapers, a lot of them really subtly push, and sometimes overtly push, us to use food to soothe and comfort ourselves. For example, I recently saw this ad, and it was for a woman who was laying in a bathtub full of chocolate. And I thought, what an interesting subtext that, in the 50s, 60s, we would use that Calgon take me away approach. And now the ads push soothing, comforting yourself with food.
So how do we combat that? I mean, yoga is one thing. I mean, giving an alternative to stress. But do you think that parents, and Alyssa's sitting here, and I know she has a question because she's a young mother of, 1 year old?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you not do that when your child is crying, when when, as you gave that example, your brother, your sister, ruins your puzzle or grabs your toy or all of those kinds of things? Those are the early stresses. Not every kid is going to sit and do yoga. What else?
Right.
Besides, if we're going to do mindful eating that's related, we want to have alternatives to dealing with stress, like you say, when you're a kid, so that you don't develop these problems later on when you're a teenager or even older.
And probably people are listening and saying, gosh, that was me. My parents often used food to soothe and comfort me, and now I'm a stress eater or an emotional eater in my life, and for many other reasons as well, not just parents. But if you're one of those adults, it's not too late. And I talk a lot about this in the book, about using different self-talk strategies to talk yourself through stress, to regulate those emotions. What we do when we're stress eating is we're somehow changing that emotion. We're turning it off, those emotions that are maybe uncomfortable, or we're escaping them or distracting from them. And one of the techniques that we use with mindfulness is just riding it out. And sometimes that's not the most attractive option for some people, but when you get really good at it, you know that stress comes, it goes, and if you don't turn off those emotions, it's easier to intervene. So if you're stressed and you're feeling angry, turning off those emotions, you don't really do much about them. You kind of delay them a bit. But if you know that you're angry, you can really target and pinpoint what do you do with them.
our relationship with food, and we as social workers see a lot of clinicians, a lot of individuals who come who have eating disorders. And Dr. Albers, is this relationship that we have with food, which is not a good one because we don't tend to engage in mindful eating, a precursor to some of these more serious eating disorders? And can we prevent them, like anorexia, bulimia?
They can be. And I think that a high percentage of my clients that come in who have developed more chronic eating problems say, you know what, I started with a diet and I lost some weight, and then the diet didn't work anymore, and then they became very frustrated or upset, and then it's developed into much more disordered eating. The nice thing about my books is that they're really for the full range of any kind of eating issues that you have. If you're somebody who's had really chronic eating issues, or you're somebody who wants to lose weight, they're really accessible tools. I have 25 different tools within the book, and I have 5 chapters. One is about stress eating, as I said. Another is about pleasure eating, because I'm a firm believer that we can still eat the foods that we love and eat them in a mindful way. Another topic is social eating, because so much of social eating railroads us into overeating. And I'll have a lot of couples that come in that says, my husband, he sabotages all my efforts or social eating, like I go to restaurants with my friends, or the holidays are coming up. So that's a huge topic that I cover in the book, as well as dieting, how to get off that dieting merry-go-round, I call it, because we go around and around. And then the last one is trauma. And sometimes people ask, well, how does trauma play into this book? If you've had any kind of trauma, which I define in the book to be any kind of distress, it could be a loss, it could be a divorce, it could be loss of a job, something that is distressing in any way, our emotions become very skewed. Sometimes you become overly hyper aware of your feelings and overly sensitive, and then sometimes you numb out from those feelings. And we need to be really on top of our feelings to be able to tell when we're hungry and full. So in this book, as you can tell, I cover this very wide range of all the different emotions to play into why we eat, because sometimes deciding what to eat is one of the most emotional decisions you'll make all day.
What about, I want to get back to the, I don't know if you described it as the happy eating, because it isn't always, we don't eat or overeat as a result of a trauma or stress. But as you say, during the holidays, or it's tempting, or going out for dinner. I used to have in-laws that every time I went to their house for a holiday, I would say to my ex-husband, they're always trying to force feed me. I'm a grown-up. I know what I want to eat or how much I want to eat, but I don't want to always have your mother telling, trying to force me to eat stuff that I don't want to eat. And I don't want to have to do it to be polite. And I think a lot of us are in that situation frequently.
I think that's very, very true, that social eating and what we call happy eating is such a big issue. And it's a misnomer that we just eat when we're stressed. In fact, many studies will point to the idea that we eat when we're happy because it keeps that happy feeling going. And you're just not as mindful because you're focused on being happy. One of the tips that I talk about in the social chapter is about being able to say no. And ironically, it's not even being able to say no to food. It's being able to say no to people. As you were talking about those in-laws who are pushing food pushers. And even in subtle ways, maybe a friend who invites you out to lunch or offers you something, another cookie. How do you say no in a way that's polite and tactful, that's not embarrassing to the other person, but really stays true to you? And that's a skill that we all have to learn, because food is around us 24/7, and people are offering it to us all the time. But we don't want to hurt their feelings. We want to be tactful. So I talk a lot about that, of being able to say no in a way that is polite.
How do you do it? Tell us, because, the holiday season is coming up, and the other events are all the, anniversaries, birthdays. I think it's 365 days a year we're confronted with that kind of a situation. So give us an example. You talk about tools. Tell us at least one of those tools that we can use, because that happens all the time, I think.
All the time,
yeah.
Right. And I have food pushers in my family, too. I think of a distant aunt who, when I go to her house, she's always pushing that extra piece of pie, and I'm always very polite and compliment her food. And I think that's one of the ways that she connects with people and shows her love and affection. So I want to honor that. So I always thank her. I always compliment her peach pie, which is the best, and I offered to take some home. I say, please, let's wrap up some more and take it home, and I'm going to save the rest for later. So it's really more about me and saying, oh, I'm full, I'm stuffed, but I want to take this with me and share this with the rest of my family. And usually that gets a nice smile and a nod. Much different than if I were to say no, just a straight out no. And then it's something that I do take home, share with family members. But, we can't be afraid to say no in social context. And I think sometimes we are, that we don't feel like we have that right to say no. With a lot of clients, I'll say, go home, be in your car, and actually out loud practice that word no. Because sometimes we don't even know what it sounds like, or it's not automatic enough to come out. And so when people ask us, oh, would you like another helping? And we're wishy-washy about it and just say, not really. They kind of push us a little bit more. But when you have that sort of firm no, you've practiced it, it comes out automatically, they back off right away. They know you mean it.
Yeah, that's good advice. We have to practice. It's sort of like just say no to drugs. It's kind of the same thing, isn't it?
It is.
You have on your website, there's a little circle of, it says mindful eating, and then you have, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4 little pieces of, I don't want to say the pie, of the plate, of what mindful eating involves. Let's talk about those. I guess they're, what would you say, emotional responses to eating?
They are emotional responses to eating. One of the pieces that I believe that you're looking at has to do with savoring food and being able to, part of mindful eating is savoring food. In my workshops, when I work with people, one of their very favorite exercises is doing a mindful eating exercise with chocolate. And, we have Halloween coming up in a couple weeks, so this is a really great time to try this, is taking that one piece of chocolate and eating it in a new way. Because often we're thinking about the next piece of chocolate before we finish the one that we have. So putting it in your hand, looking at it really closely, slowly opening it, listening to the crinkle of the foil, bringing it up to your nose and taking a nice deep whiff of it. A lot of times my clients are surprised that when they take that deep whiff of chocolate, that it produces a lot of emotional responses, because chocolate is one of those smells that taps into both our pleasure and guilt at the same time. Putting it in their mouth, eating it slowly, and experiencing that chocolate in a different way instead of, that mindlessly popping the chocolate in your mouth. And I use chocolate in my exercises really intentionally. If you've ever done a mindful eating exercise, you know that a lot of times people use raisins. But I don't believe in using raisins because we don't really struggle with raisins. I don't wake up in the morning saying,
I want that
no
raisin. Yeah.
Right, no raisins for me today, And so it's a great way to practice coping with cravings. So I would suggest to people that they try that at a time, not when they're in the middle of a craving, but sort of try that experience of slowing down, savoring it, really smelling it. And each and every bite that they take in a meal, that first bite being a mindful bite. They don't have to do the whole meal that way, but starting off on a good foot will really take them a far way.
You know what I did the other day? I'm going to ask you. This is a therapy session, I guess, but I had a craving for a bagel, and so I took the bagel out of the freezer and I heated it. And bagel is at least 300 to 350 calories. So I started to eat it, and then immediately I cut it in half, and I took the other half and put it in the disposal and disposed of it. So, and once I did that, I was fine. Then I ate the half a bagel, which was okay, 150 calories. And it took a little bit of, I guess, emotional strength to be able to put because I don't like to waste food, but I think it was worth it. And that was my way of, like, there would be no choice, because the others were frozen, I wasn't going to unfreeze another bagel. You talk about being mindful. So and that solved my problem. I don't know if that's healthy or not.
Oh, I love that. I love what a mindful moment that you had. You felt that pull and immediately responded to it. And I talk a lot about the difference between reacting and responding, that sometimes we have that urge or that feeling and we just act on it immediately. But responding is thinking it through and that sounds like what you did, of the best strategy you knew for you is to get rid of it right away, because if not, it was going to be hanging around. And like most of us, if we have it and it's in front of us, we're going to eat it.
Yeah.
One of the tips that I talk about as well that's very easy, and it's the kind of tip that you're going to find in my book, that people can start today. So if you're listening, at your next meal, try eating with your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, eat with your left hand, because that's going to slow down that automatic hand-to-mouth flow that we have. It's a little bit like writing with your opposite hand. You can do it, but you really have to kind of think about it, and it feels different. So it's an interesting experiment to do on yourself, and it's based on a research study that had people eat with their opposite hand, and they actually ate 30% less because they were so much more attuned to what they were eating.
It also doesn't make it it's not as comfortable either, so the whole experience doesn't become so comforting because it's awkward. So you don't want to do it, I would imagine. You wouldn't want to eat as much because it's awkward, just simply because it's awkward. That would be another reason, I would imagine. Alyssa,
right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alyssa, do you have you were just...
Oh, when you were talking about the bagel portion, and I'm one of those people who went to a training once, and I took the time to actually measure out my portions and sort of see what the actual serving size was. And when I eat now, and I became familiar that I know what a portion is. I don't have to like measure things out. I have a pretty good grasp of understanding what the portion is. But people will look at me and say, "That's all you're eating?" And I think there's a lot a concept, especially with things like cereal and things. Oh, we have to fill the whole bowl. People don't really understand really what a portion is, and they sort of look at you and don't understand why you're eating such a small amount when really that's all you really need. And do you find that the people that you're working with have a understanding of portion, or do they have to develop that mindfulness of how much they really should be eating?
Yeah, I love what you're saying, is that it's so true that we often use external cues to figure out what a portion is. As you're saying, we just use the bowl as a gauge, fill it up, and that's what we consider a portion size. So as I'm working with clients, I teach them to use more of those internal cues, and as you're saying, educating themselves on what those portions are. And when they become more mindful, they tune in and they realize that a lot of times they're just using these external standards of filling up a plate or going with the external portion size, and then they turn it inward and say, you know what, this is what I know to be a portion for me, that either works for me. And people are often surprised at how much smaller the portions are when they, measure them objectively or begin tuning in to themselves. And that takes some time. It's really a process to rewire your brain to know what a portion is for you.
It is really true, and especially when we go, as so many people in our society go out to dinner and lunch, having the mindfulness, I guess, to know, okay, I've eaten enough, I can wrap the rest home, because sometimes the portions that they give you are enough for like 4 people, so you have to have that mindset to say no. And I think working, like you said, working with the portions, having people understand that is a great tool.
On my website, Eat.Q.com, there's a free quiz that people can take to see how much of an emotionally intelligent eater that they are. This is kind of a new concept. And it talks about and taps into how much does emotion rule your decisions. And it's often surprising that all the decisions that we make, and there's a study by Brian Wansink out of Cornell who says that we make over 250 decisions every day about what to eat, what not to eat. And the majority of those decisions have really nothing to do with our hunger. They have to do with being bored, stressed, anxious, all of these different reasons. And when we become aware at how emotion channels us from one decision to another, then we become more in charge and in control of those decisions.
Dr. Albers, so what do we do? Let's start from the beginning. How do we, we're talking about adults right now, but I always like to, especially as social workers, how can we, advise clients, even young mothers, how, in terms of feeding their kids? I mean, both Alyssa and I breastfed our babies, and we're big breastfeeders. Or mine are already in their 30s, but hers is 1 year old. And I found that even the medical establishment was against and I say the word breastfeeding because your baby is not getting enough food. Breast milk isn't enough. You need to supplement. You need to take, what's the formula? You need to add whole foods. I mean, there was always this push right from the beginning that you have to force feed your baby. And one of my boys, I fed him for 9 months on breast milk, and he had nothing else. And the pressure from my mother and my mother-in-law were
Same with me.
same with
My
you.
daughter
Like,
didn't eat till 10 months.
don't they need food? Don't they? I said, well, I'm not starving my baby, and he's growing, but you really have to be quite strong and and very sure of yourself to be able to say, no, I know this is good for me and good for my baby. So, I mean, it starts right from the beginning.
It does start from the beginning. And what's interesting about kids early on is that we are mindful eaters when we're born, that if a child isn't hungry, they won't eat. I mean, you can put a bottle in their mouth or a breast in their mouth, and they're going to push it aside if they're really not hungry. So they start out in the world tuning into those natural cues of knowing when we're hungry or not. And then it's about the age of 1 that kids develop language, and they start to realize the association between a cookie is something special and these connections that we make with food on a deeper level. And then suddenly that relationship to food begins to change. So as a parent, I think one of the issues that comes up the most as I'm working with parents is, and such a struggle, is not rewarding kids with food or soothing them with food. And it is such a struggle because it works. Your child is crying and they want that lollipop, and it instantly works. And it's so much harder to get down on the floor and rub their back and talk them through it. It's just such a longer process. But people who are stress eaters, parents who've grown up with this difficult relationship to food, know how important it is to give those other things a try and really work through it.
But what about, you're talking about, it's easier to give the cookie when they're crying and everybody's happy, but is it just as bad? Because you are rewarding them with food. What if you reward them with a carrot or celery or an apple? Isn't the process the same? I mean, because you shouldn't be rewarding them with food.
Any kind of food. Right.
Yeah.
Whether it's healthy or not.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Because it becomes that association between when I'm upset, then I eat. No matter what it is, it just becomes that link. And the rewarding as well. And we do it all the time, that even as adults, we'll say, gosh, I had a really great day at work, or I got a promotion. I'm going to go out for a special dinner or ice cream. And it's not, I think that's not such a horrible thing. We have to celebrate and things like that. But doing it on a daily basis, that we should treat ourselves and feel like, reward ourselves in non-food ways, or, try and add those things into our lives, because we do lots of things that require both rewards and just our own internal validation. So if we're so hooked on using food as a reward, boy, in the long run, it's going to be tough.
I just had a question or a comment, I guess. It's sort of having to try to have parents even develop self-confidence. I know when I was out the other few times recently, I mean, my daughter just turned 1. She's 13 months old, and when she started crying when we were out in public places, people would say, "Oh, does she want a piece of candy?" I'm like, or does she want a cookie or things like that? And I'm like, "Oh no, she's fine." So it's sort of, I guess as parents, and we have to be comfortable and confident in our ability to say no to other people, and confident with our parenting styles that we can turn down no, and a lot of time the external pressures from others to sort of conform to this, reward with food, help kids stop crying with food. So
right, and it's so true. It happens all the time, as you're saying, and when you become attuned to it, and as a new parent or a parent, when you start noticing it, it happens all the time. Grandparents do it. People at the bank, they've got lollipop candy. My own daughter, she was in a gymnastics class, and at the end of the class, they always gave them a lollipop. And it was, as you're saying, that confidence as a parent of talking with that instructor and saying, let's have some other ideas. What about some stickers? Or what about some little certificate awards and other things that we can also give to them? So, but it's hard. It's sometimes hard having that conversation because it sounds radical. Not giving that lollipop, something else.
Yeah, it's sort of, you get I've already gotten some sort of looks like, why not? So it's definitely sort of the not the norm of our culture to turn down food or to turn down some sort of sweet, especially when it's dealing with the children. They always are like, oh, children deserve that. They're just a kid. They don't need to be, they always can refer to it as like a diet. And it's not about dieting. It's you're teaching your child to be healthy. And I think people have to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
I also think another piece of that is, and maybe you can respond to this, is that we have to, there's a mindset that we have to have food available all the time for our kids. You take your kids to a sports activity or gymnastics or out into the mall or wherever you're going, and most of the time you'll see young mothers or young fathers, they have food in the car. So the food is always available in the car. Perhaps, if one doesn't, I tried to be mindful of this in keeping with your theory, which I completely agree with, is that I wouldn't bring food in the car. The kid could, my kids could go for a half an hour in a car or an hour, even on a car trip without food. You can eat at specified times, but not this constant availability of food, this kind of, and then you start the grazing and eating, and there's really no separation, I guess. There's always food available, and if it's available, you're going to eat it. We were talking about what you did, this experiment with your friends, and I guess in France, I like that. Taking the M&Ms that were available, everybody's stuffing their faces and they're gone, but the M&Ms that weren't so available, nobody was eating. So I think it works the same way with children.
It does, and I love what you're saying about the car is really trying to avoid, to the best of your ability, feeding kids in the car, because it does give this concept away from the table, that you eat anywhere instead of food being special and sitting down at a table. One thing that I think parents do really well, and I think is a lesson that we can learn from them and adapt to ourselves as adults, is that moms, when you can look in their purse, they've always got some sort of snack or treat. And sometimes it's overly available. But I think moms do a good job of is regulating their kids' hunger a little bit at a time throughout the day. They know that if their child gets overly hungry, they're going to get very cranky. And as adults, I don't think we do that as well, that if we feed our hunger a little bit at a time and don't get overly hungry, we're not going to get as cranky. So I think parents can kind of tune into their child's hunger and anticipate a little bit better when they might be getting a little bit hungry so that they don't crash in the day. So I think that's a lesson that we can learn in trying to regulate our own hunger during the day, is eating a little bit of snacks here and there.
What's the responsibility of the schools? Because after 5 years old, your children spend most of their time out of the house and at school. Where there's food available. Other kids have food in their lunch boxes. So how do you regulate, as a parent, how do you regulate that?
That's a tough one. One strategy is, and you can't follow your child to school, but you can help them to themselves make some healthy choices. Like, for example, at a school that my daughter goes to, she has the choice of the white milk, the chocolate milk, or orange juice. So when she goes, it's completely her choice. So talking with your child before they leave about, what is going to be their choice and what is their strategy for how that they're going to pick. So they can even do that as young as 5 or 6. But they get that concept of healthy eating. So starting early and helping them to make the right choices. But you're right that sometimes the school has a huge responsibility in providing those healthy choices and what is available. So I think as a parent, you have to go to the school, look at their menu, see what they're eating, even maybe go a day if you have that opportunity. If you have a day off of work, go and meet your child for lunch and see what they're eating. Sit down with them and see what it's like. I was surprised. I was visiting a school in Cleveland the other day, and I was surprised that they only had about 15 minutes to eat. And I thought, oh my gosh, how does anybody even get their lunch, sit down, and eat in this short a period of time? Talk about encouraging them to speed eat. So in those things, I wouldn't have even known had I not been visiting the school. So I would visit and see what the whole environment is like. Is it loud in there? Is it quiet? How do they choose their foods? Is it given to them on a plate? There's so many different aspects of the environment that your child has to navigate. And if you see it for yourself, you can kind of give them some coaching.
What you're saying is then empower your own child, because the school situation may not be ideal, but if you go there and you see what your child has to work with or deal with on a daily basis, then you can empower them to make the right choices. That's a really good idea. We had a situation here in upstate New York, I think, where a school, and Alyssa, I don't know if you knew about this, but they put healthy foods in the cafeteria. The kids had been eating, the cafeteria diet had been very unhealthy, but the kids weren't eating it, and they found that the kids were dumping the food in the wastebasket or in the trash cans, and so they went back, as I understand it, went back to serving them the unhealthy foods because those are the foods that the kids would eat.
Wow. Yeah. And what a dilemma there. It sounds like you have to have a complete overhaul of starting over again. And that is unfortunate that so many kids have been exposed to these sugary foods and high salt foods and things like that, that when they get whole foods, sometimes they taste so bland, even a strawberry. When you think about things like sweeteners, Splenda, and other kinds of sweeteners and things like that, artificial sweeteners, sometimes they're 300 to 600 times sweeter than actual sugar. And so when you encounter sugar, and particularly natural sugar like strawberries, it just doesn't taste as sweet until you step away from some of those artificial things. Then you really can appreciate that sweetness of that strawberry again. But we don't even really realize it.
I'd like to hear some of your success stories, because obviously, you have a lot of clients, a lot of patients who come to you, and mindful eating is one of the things that you're teaching them. So give us an example, like, of a success story, or a couple of them, that individuals or patients that you've had.
I have a great one that I've been working with since probably about March. And it's a mom who has 2 kids, professional mom. And like many mothers, her child is now 9 and 4. And by this time in her life, she realized she was last on the list. She was taking care of everybody else except for herself. And she described it to be like, she called it the 3-pound creep. And she said one day, it's like she sort of woke up and she said, how did I become overweight and overeat? She said each year it was like, I gained 2 or 3 pounds. And that's not a big deal. Not a big deal at all within a year to go up or down. And she said, but then times that by 9 years or 10 years, and then suddenly this 3 pounds in a year that's not a big deal becomes 30 pounds. And so it was just sort of this wake up for herself one day of saying, you know what, I got to put myself back on the list. So she came in and we started working on the mindful eating. And she also incorporated some exercise into her life. She got that app, which is Couch to 5K, and which is a very inspiring app for people who don't exercise. It's great to be in training. And so we were doing the eating, and she had started some of the exercise as well. And for her, it was about managing the stress in her life. And each morning, even breakfast was a stressful ordeal, getting all the kids ready. And she found herself stuffing food in her mouth as she was, doing her hair at the same time. And as you can imagine, that if you're doing your hair and eating at the same time, you're not going to be mindful of what you eat. By the time she got to work, she was starving again. So we really had to revamp, in some ways, her whole lifestyle and coping with stress and sitting down at a table and being mindful. And just a few weeks ago, she came in and she was wearing a Whitney Houston t-shirt. And this is very funny because I had this moment where I was like, okay, I know that this is working, because this was very different than what she usually wears. She's a professional. She comes in with her Kate Spade purse, her Tahari suit, looking very, professional. And she had this Whitney Houston t-shirt on. I said, tell me about your t-shirt. And she said, look at this. I haven't worn this shirt in 20 years. I was in my closet and I put it on. It was one of my favorite shirts, and now it fits again. And it was such an exciting moment. And I love that it wasn't about the scale. We also talked about putting the scale aside because she had become really wrapped up in the numbers. But putting on that shirt was such a sign of success for her, that she felt good in her body again. And she said, no scale can measure how good I feel about myself and my energy level. And so she is someone I'm so excited about, because she's excited, and you can tell that it's made such a difference to her.
Well, she sounds like the poster child for mindful eating, definitely. And speaking of that, I was online and I'm looking, this is the opposite of that. Well, Beyonce, okay, she just had a baby. And so she has 50 pounds to lose. And she's advertising some kind of a, supplement to eat, some kind of a vitamin, or it's supposed to be a healthy vitamin. If you eat this, it will absorb the fat and the calories and you will lose weight quickly. And young girls, adults, look to someone like Beyonce and think, oh, well, if that's the way she loses weight, then that's the way I'm going to lose weight. So you're kind of fighting aren't we? Those kinds of images and looking up to these movie stars who do these kind of all or nothing dieting, which is the opposite of mindful eating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish you could see my face as you said supplements there. My eyes were rolling. I was like, oh, it's the kind of thing that we fight every day, is these messages of it's easy, it's quick. And number one thing that we work on when somebody enters my office or is reading one of my books, and I talk about this in the very beginning of the book, of putting aside that diet quick mentality. And it's so hard because it's so ingrained into our mind. It's got to be quick, it's got to be fast, it's got to be easy. And all the techniques that I talk about in my book are easy things. But, my motto is that it's race, not pace. I mean, pace, not race. That we have to pace ourselves, and we're not going to race through this. And when you do pace yourself, then you get through it.
Pace, not race. Dr. Susan Albers. We have to say goodbye. Eat.Q, unlock the weight loss power of emotional intelligence. Thanks so much for being on the Social Workers today. We learned a lot.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, Catherine.
I appreciate it.
Yes,
go to my website, Eat.Q.com.
Great, thanks. So we're going to say goodbye. We'll talk for a couple minutes.
It was good. She was very good.
Yeah.
A lot of the questions that I had, she pretty much answers in her book, because everything I had written on my paper, I had just checked off. Okay, that's how you deal with that. That's a good response to that. So very thorough book.
Emotional eating and mindful, and I didn't say this to her, but maybe you and I have discussed this, Alyssa, but mindful eating also has to do from the very beginning when you go to the grocery store, and it's mindful shopping is what it also really taking time to buy the right kind of food, and maybe not even buy so much food in quantity. I mean, you see people with just piles of stuff in their carts, and I'm one of those people who I'm very judgmental. I look in their cart to see what they're buying and how much they're buying. And, usually the people who are slimmer have dietetic, I don't want to use the word dietetic, healthier food and less of it.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you do, but sometimes it's more, with this economy, sometimes it's cheaper to buy in bulk. But what I do, and I've done it for years, is I buy Ziplocs and I portion things out, and I freeze. I'm a big on freeze, and I'm
a freezer too.
And I make things like ziti's or dishes, and I make meatballs or things, and I freeze them in perfect portions for me, so I can just take it out. And even if it's a long day at work, I come home, I had some sort of chicken prepared, I just take it out, I heat it up, and it's a healthy meal, but it didn't take the time. So all you have to do is set aside some time, be mindful of what you're making, freeze it, store it, put it in a perfect portion, I guess you could say, and it's available to you. So it's all about thinking in advance and preparing and being mindful of what you're doing and what you're consuming, because it really is important. And I'm very aware of that now with my daughter. I want to be aware of what she's eating, and I want her to get the healthiest things that she can.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because freezing is such a good idea.
You should see I have a deep freezer and a regular freezer. I'm big on it. So.
Yeah, I'm a big freezer. Yeah, exactly. So yes, if you buy the big portions, you freeze, but you have to do it right away.
Yeah.
Get it in the freezer so you don't eat it.
Yeah.
And if you take it out and you make a mistake and you have too much, then put it in the disposal. I mean, you have to be, and that makes you really mindful of portions.
Yeah. Because you have to people need to take the time to actually measure what the portion is for 2 weeks, measure everything, and just to get a feel of what it is. I did that, and I was shocked at really what the size of the portions was. And now I don't need to measure. I know what it is. I know what a portion is of cereal. I know what a portion is of meat. I know what it is now, but I had to take that initial step to actually measure for about 2 weeks to learn and become comfortable to know what the actual portions are. And it helps.
I can eat as much as my 6'4" boyfriend, and if it's good food, the excuse can be, well, it's all good food, but I can gain weight from the all good food if the portion is 2 or 3 times what I should be eating. So we have to be mindful of that. You know, you can get fat on
health and on apples. Excess is never good.
Right.
Too much of one thing or even a good thing is not good for you.
Luke, do you want to have the last word? We have a minute. We're giving you the last word on mindful eating.
I was given a book recently that my cousin-in-law, as I'll call him, wrote about cutting, like, the death of the diet. And I haven't, like, I've looked at it some, but I haven't really gotten fully on board with it yet. I've gained a lot of weight since quitting drugs and alcohol. That's often an effect of quitting drugs and alcohol.
Or a substitute for.
Yes. And so I'd like to lose some weight, but I often buy a lot of food when I go to the supermarket, but I also, like, try to portion it out and freeze a lot of it. But that's because I don't have a car, and